Welcome back, everyone. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true Appalachian horror stories, tales from deep within the mountains, where the whispers aren't always the wind. But before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Now let's begin. I keep the radio on the kitchen table, face down, volume at 2, squelch just shy of quiet. It's not the official rig, just a little handheld with a chewed antenna and the county channels saved from the days I ran brush fires. I lie to folks and say it makes me feel useful, like I could still help if a call went out. The truth is, silence sits wrong in the house now. It makes room for that knock. It started a week after the fire on Cherry Fork. The air that day had tasted like a hot coin. We had towed the skid unit up past the pond and fought brush that ran faster than we could think. Creosote pop, laurel leaves going to brittle fists, the kind of heat that licks your lashes. We did what we do. Cut line with worn Pulaskis, soaked the edge, shouted over the wind. There were 2 of us on that far side, then 3, then, when the smoke unrolled, 1 less than we needed. We didn't say his name for a while. Saying his name made it stay. Anyway, my mother's clock quit ticking that next Tuesday. It's one of those little brass carriage things that chimes too proud for the room it's in. It stalled on the half hour, and in the quiet that followed, something tapped the window frame behind my head. 3 knocks. Not hard, not soft, bone plain. Then again, farther off. I told myself it was a limb bumping the eave or a shy woodpecker testing a bad tree. I told myself a lot of small, sensible things. The pattern knotted my stomach because it was the one me and my brother used to tap through the thin wall between our rooms. Wow. And we were kids in the trailer. 3 quick to mean you awake. He'd answer with 2, then drag his knuckles once, slow, our private goodnight when words were a luxury we didn't have. I hadn't thought about that in years. You can go a long time without a sound until it finds you again, and then it's all you hear. If I'm honest, the hill behind the house always had its own voices. Wind-combing pine, a buck chuffing down in the draw, holler dogs making a chain. But this thing didn't join the choir. It waited for quiet and then took it. The knocks weren't in one place. They'd sit above the ridge like a man tapping on a hollow log with the pad of his thumb, then answer low by the old corn crib. If I stepped onto the porch and held my breath, I could feel them lining up with the pause in my chest. I tested it without telling myself I was testing it. Held air. The space between knocks widened. Let it out, the pace picked up. I put it out of my mind the way you put a splinter out by picking at everything else. I tried not to think of the boy and not to think of my brother and thought of both anyway, equally and constantly, while I washed dishes or kicked mud off my boots or stood in the road with the volunteer chief and pretended the fire had been the kind that got done when the trucks went home. Nights grew long in a cold way. I walked less. I sat at the table more. Fingers splayed on either side of the radio like it was a small animal I was warming back to life. The knocks learned the rooms of my house. I kept telling myself there was no learning going on, that it was wind, wood, water in the hill, somewhere tapping itself free. I told myself that, and I listened harder. There was a night, I could give you the date if that mattered. First frost stiff on the grass, those little glass needles that catch the porch light and make it look like someone scattered sugar out there. I'd stacked oak by the door, but I didn't light the stove. Heat has a way of making me sleepy and dream bad, and I needed my edges sharp. The radio muttered traffic, somebody on County 3 arguing about a gate. I turned it down, and the house exhaled in that way that makes you feel like maybe you aren't alone after all. 3 knocks on the underside of the porch, right under my chair. Not roofline, not the yard. Right there, as if a hand reached up through the plank and asked a question. My knees twitched. I didn't answer. Old folks teach you not to, same as not to whistle after sundown or set your hat on a bed. But the second set came from the slope this time, by the line of poplar where the ground drops off, and they had the soft hollow of rotten heartwood in them. 3. Space just long enough to breathe wrong. 3 again. I took the headlamp and didn't turn it on. Your eyes can learn the dark if you let them, and the moon had a low, slow light to it, a thin slice laying silver in the frost. The ridge climbed like a shoulder blade out of the yard. The laurel there is tangled and mean, what folks call laurel hell. Switchback deer path, slick as glass where the leaves have polished the dirt. I know that climb blind. I've done it for mushrooms, for ginseng, for no reason except to feel my lungs earn their keep. The knocks kept to my left, high, like they rode the tree crowns. Birch tinks when it cools. Hickory has a denser sound. This wasn't either. It was skin on wood, as if someone wanted the tree to know it was being touched. Halfway up, I couldn't keep my breath quiet. That's when I realized the rhythm had gone from answering me to leading me. I didn't want to be led. I went flat behind a blowdown and felt the rot give like a damp sponge. The smell came up. Black earth, old smoke, the sweet sick of burned rhododendron. Somewhere a barred owl bickered with himself and quit in the middle of a sentence. Then the radio in my pocket crackled, though I hadn't keyed it. Not a voice. A dry little tap that popped the squelch 3 times in a row, clean as a fingernail against a jar. 3 taps. Pause. 3. I put my thumb on the talk button and didn't press. The wind walked the ridge above me and the knocks answered from there, ahead of it by a half breath. I tapped back on the radio body without keying the mic. Muscle memory I hadn't planned. 3 quick. In the same heartbeat, the trees to my right, trees I would have sworn were thinned from the last ice storm, answered me from a place no footing would allow. Fast, almost eager. It's a bad word for a sound. Eager, but I don't have a better one. The headlamp burned a hole in my pocket with its weight. I didn't turn it on. Light makes a line, and a line is something to cross. I wanted everything to stay shapeless. The ground leveled some near the old fire break, a scar that looks like the spine of a great thing trying to push up through the dirt. Below there, Cherry Fork cleaves down toward the road. We'd hauled the boy past this place, if you want the truth. Hands under his shoulders, the weight wrong in a way you don't forget. I hadn't been back since. The ash underfoot squished, not dry, not with the dew fallen and the cold pressing toward the earth. My boot hit a root, and it sounded before my foot did, like a drum in a dark room. The knock landed on top of it from somewhere over my head and matched my rhythm like I had been the one to start it, not the other way around. I tried again with the old code. 3, 2, 1. Our childish goodnight made into a trial balloon. For a moment the woods held its breath. The radio ticked once, twice. Then the knocks replied, but altered. 3, 2, and a long dragging sound against wood, like someone moving an arm slow and steady down the ribs of a big tree. My scalp felt tight. I could have picked any direction and run. Instead, I stood there and counted the space between my inhale and the next answer and felt, as sure as a man can feel anything invisible, that whatever it was had its ear bent to the same darkness I stood in, waiting for me to do the next small, stupid thing. I backed out the way you do with dogs. No teeth shown, no quick moves. Laurel snapped at my jacket cuffs just to see if I'd flinch. The moon had gone behind a cloud by the time I found the yard, a big, slow blindfold. I didn't turn my back to the ridge. The radio in my pocket brushed my thigh with every step, suggesting its own pulse. When the porch boards took my weight, the house settled its joints like a big animal getting comfortable again. I waited for 3 knocks under my feet. They didn't come. Inside, the kitchen light looked wrong, too yellow, too small for the room. I boiled water for tea I wouldn't drink and stood with my hands on either side of the stove, palms open to the heat, the way men do when they don't have words and need to look like they're doing something anyway. My heart learned 3 and wouldn't unlearn it. Thud, 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 pause. I started breathing on the off beats to see if I could make it lose the game. The silence fed on it. Every sensible attempt came out of the drawer I keep my stubborn in. Woodpeckers? Pileated, if we're talking loud, but they drill. Steady, biting, with a machine fall that builds into a rhythm. Sapsuckers stutter, but this wasn't that. Branches? Cold will pop a tree, sure. Hespe. Shilly maple, but it's a sharp report with no skin to it. This had skin. Maybe kids screwing around. It would take a good climber to cross that laurel in the dark without a sound and more than one person to get the call and answer in 2 places at once. I wanted it to be a person so bad I could have gone to the window and begged for footprints. When folks say their mind is playing tricks, I think they do their mind a kindness. Tricks are harmless and end when you turn the card over. This felt like someone else knew the rules to a game and I didn't. I wrote it down to make it smaller. 3 knocks by the porch, 11:23 p.m. 3 by poplar line, 1 minute later. 3 on radio, both at firebreak and pocket. I underlined the word radio twice like that made any sense. The ink looked too bright on the page. I closed the notebook and put it under a stack of phone books like weight could keep it from happening again. Sleep wasn't a thing I did so much as fell against. I left the radio on the table, face down, and lay on top of the blankets with my boots off but my socks still on, as if that would cut my waking time in half if I needed to move. The house did its late-night shift. Fridge hiccup, mouse in the wall, the small descending tick of cooling metal. I found my brother without meaning to in that hour where memory crawls out of its holes. His finger curled against the sheetrock between us, that soft double tap we made when we were too sad or too mad to say anything at all. I put my knuckle back against the kitchen table because there was nowhere else to put it, and the empty room didn't answer me. That hurt worse than if it had. In daylight, I took the excuse of checking fence line to go up to the fire break again. The mud held prints, but they were mine. A raccoon had done circles like a drunk preacher up near the crest. No scuffs on the poplar, no scratch lines like boys with knives, no sap balling up where a stick had knocked it. I knocked on a dozen trunks, sound changed with species, with girth, with rot. I even keyed the radio and let the squelch drag just to see if there was any ghost in the wire that would tell on itself. The speaker gave me static and one blurry voice too far downrange to pick out. I told myself the taps had been that voice hitting atmospheric noise just right. If you lie to yourself out loud, it sometimes sticks better. I started noticing when I breathed. That's the worst of it. The body does something for you your whole life, and one night the woods teach you it can be counted and measured against something that doesn't care about you. I keep catching myself matching the microwave's hum or the washer's cycle, and when I break the rhythm, there's a moment, thin as a paper cut, where I am sure something is listening for me to fall back in line. That's a stupid way to live, but it's where I'm at. Mama came by on Sunday with cornbread and a bag of apples she said tasted like October used to taste before things got so strange. She pinched my cheek like I was still 10 and stretched out to full young man height overnight. I told her I'd heard knocking, and she said without missing a beat, "Then don't answer, baby. Not after dark. Don't answer if it knows your name. Not all calls are for you." I laughed because I was supposed to, but it sat in me like a nail. I don't have a lesson for you, or a moral, or even a theory that makes me feel smarter than what I felt in the trees. The best I can offer is this. I didn't invite it, and I'm not sure it cares either way. If it's grille, F, it's got feet. If it's a person, they've got places to stand I can't get to. If it's the ridge, well, she's older than me and doesn't owe me an explanation. The knocks come less some weeks and more others. Sometimes they're gone long enough I can forget what my own breath sounds like. Then I sit with my hand on the kitchen table, and the clock stalls on the half hour. And somewhere under my floor, or high above the poplar line, 3 little notes knock the quiet into a shape I recognize and pretend I don't. I don't mind saying I've made most of my grocery money with a trowel and a slow walk. Sang doesn't jump into your hand. You learn the folds of a hillside, the kind of shade a plant likes, how the ground feels when there's a root worth a prayer under it. I don't poach, don't take cedars, and I plant the berries back. Press them into the damp with a thumb, the way my uncle taught me. The patch I was going for sits above dog slaughter, in that shoulder of laurel that always looks like a green smoke from a distance. Folks laugh at the name until they see what water does in a tight place. You stand by that creek when it's got rain on its back and you'll stop laughing. The morning I went in, fog was a low quilt down in the hollow. The sycamores wore that pale bark that shows every handprint the wind ever laid on them. I had the little brass compass I keep hung on a cord, the one with a scar on its face where it kissed a rock years ago. It's not fancy, just trustworthy. I keep a lighter, a wrapped sandwich, a trowel, and a thin knife in the pack, and an old topo folded to a soft square. GPS means nothing in a green tunnel. You carry your sense and your count. Mine's a rhythm more than a number. Pacing beads in my head, 20 paces to a breath, 5 breaths to a check. It's the way I map a place back onto itself. Laurel Hell isn't like other woods. It's a body. It closes around you and makes a room out of vine and leaf and branch that doesn't have walls until you try to leave. Sound doesn't travel. It curls. A creek 10 steps away can sound like it's in the next county. That morning the thrush were quiet. The only noise was the slick hush of my jacket against glossy leaves and the small scratch of the trowel handle on my pack frame. I had scouted that patch the week before, saw 3 4-prongs in good shade and marked a skirt of ground around them in my head. I don't blaze. Like a logger, I don't want to lead a thief. If I mark at all, it's a low notch at knee height with a diagonal angle only I use and a thumbprint of dirt pressed into the cut. It's more for me than a sign. I found the first notch on a black gum where I remembered leaving it and told myself I was on time, on track. The compass settled well enough. Needle shivered and then found home. I took a bearing that would bring me to a little seep spring. You can smell a good seep before you see it, iron and damp leaf. Inside the laurel, the light went flat. Sun came through in steady milk instead of blades. I set my rhythm. 20 steps. Breath. 20. Somewhere in there, the count started acting like it was getting directions from someone else. My feet felt a half urge to turn right when I had planned left. The compass needle did a twitch, just once, like it was being breathed on. I tapped it with a fingernail. It settled. I told myself the rock here can have iron in it. Plenty of places like that. Hunters get turned around and swear the mountain's got a hand on them. I walked on, already promising the story to myself the way you do. I'll get the roots. I'll get out. I'll tell about how the laurel tried but didn't get me. By the time I reached where the seep should have been, I had only found damp and no run, and the ground was sloped funny, like a table with one short leg. I cut left to correct. Somewhere back in me, a little worry lifted its head and then set it down again. I listen for that kind of worry, but I don't feed it. The laurel had gone from tunnel to maze without changing shape. I could feel it. There's a point where walking stops being forward and becomes something a place lets you do for a while. I found a tree with a blaze on it and felt the small satisfaction of seeing my own mark. A diagonal notch with the little dirt print on the raw wood. Only the sap around it had skinned over. That shouldn't have been. I'd cut that last week. It ought to be wet-flecked still, sticky and bright. This looked like somebody had matched my hand and then given it days. I touched the cut. It wasn't exactly dry, it was warm, which made no sense in shadow. I pressed my thumb into the line where I always do, thinking if the print matched I'd laugh at my own superstition. The wound took my thumb like it had been waiting for it. I backed off without rubbing the sap on my pants. The compass needle pulled hard toward a direction that wasn't north and then spun lazy like someone slid a magnet across a table under it. I held it flat and held my breath, which is a stupid thing to do to make a needle tell the truth. But there it is. It steadied on east when I knew full well from the hillside that the river sat west. The count crumbled there. I'd make 20 and feel a forgotten step, tug my foot toward an opening that didn't exist until I looked. The little trick of listening for water failed me. The creek crawled from left to right and then back again, like it was scurrying under the floorboards. I found boot prints in a patch of black soil where Laurel had kept the dew. My boots, no question. Same worn heel, same little paring of rubber peeling at the toe from a rock last month. They ran ahead of me at an angle I wouldn't have chosen, past a hemlock with a scar that looked like a bitten lip. I crouched and tried to read time in the edges. Fresh crush is glossy, old crush blues. These looked both dark and slick and already thinking about dust. I put my boot inside one to check and it nested like it had been traced for me. Another blaze showed up on a sourwood, same cut, same bad habit of setting it low. I told myself I'd been here before and forgot that memory plays games when every room looks like the next. I walked until the light turned orange through the leaves the way it does at 5 in October, and then I looked at my watch and it was still not even 11. I stood there with morning on my wrist and evening in my eyes and felt that small, mechanical part of me that counts and orients and keeps me a person stutter like a misfiring plug. The laurel leaned, which is a thing laurel doesn't do. Leaves brushed my ear as if someone who knew me well enough to know I hate that did it anyway. I cut my own blaze then, meaner than I like, higher up, so I'd know it. The knife went through bark and into a softness that felt like wet cardboard. The shavings falling onto my boot were brown already, not pale. I stared at the mess and told myself I'd just coughed up dark cambium from a dry tree. When I pushed on, I came to a clearing. I say clearing, but in laurel that means a pocket 2 feet wider than the path you've been fighting through, and I knew it. A pine root made a figure 8 at the center. I'd seen it, I thought, last year, with a coiled black snake sleeping in the loop. There was no snake now, only a scatter of red berries pressed into the mud like someone had thumbed them down, neat, 1, 2, 3 in a line. Seed berries, the exact way I leave them. I had not dug a root yet. Somewhere to my right, leaves moved with a sound like a hand sliding down corduroy. My pack strap dragged across my shoulder blade with the exact same rhythm from behind. I stood still and counted my breath because that was the one thing I could still make happen on purpose. The smell came up from the ground. Crushed bay, cold iron, the faint sweetness of old rot, and braided itself into something I wanted to call familiar and didn't dare. I took the bearing I would have taken to get out. The compass laughed without moving, if a thing without a mouth can laugh. And the day did that trick again where the light went to honey and then back to milk without moving the shadows. That's when I stopped thinking I was lost and started thinking I was being followed by a version of myself who'd had a different day. I got out by choosing a word and sticking to it. Up. That was it. Up ignores creek. Up ignores compass. Up ignores the animal sense that says a path is smoother the other way. I cut where I had to and let the laurel slap me hard when it wanted to. It broke my hat brim and clawed the back of my neck as if reminding me we had business left. I didn't answer. I saved my breath. When I shoulder rolled onto the old fire road like a fish thrown from a net, I felt relief the way you feel pain. At the edges first, then filling. The world had lines again. The trees had verticals that didn't shift when I blinked. Down at the falls, the water said the one true thing in the county. I crouched like a man at a well and washed sap off my fingers. People were there. 2 college kids in neon shoes taking photos. A couple in matching jackets. A dog anxious to drink everything. I watched them like wildlife. I checked my watch and the time was late by 2 hours or early by 1, depending on which light you believed. The sun had to decide for itself in my absence, I guess. My phone, which I hadn't. Tea used, sat at 12% and warm like it had been working harder than me. When I stepped back into the shade, the smell of laurel came with me in a way I don't love. It was inside my shirt and up behind my eyes. At home, I laid the compass on the table and spun it with a finger. The needle finally found north like a man who's done wrong and decided to tell the truth after supper. I tried to talk myself into a sensible version. There's magnetite in those knobs, sure. Laurel messes with your sense. Loss of sky, loss of horizon, leaves trained by 1,000 animal bodies into thick habits. Time feels longer when all you see is the same green. Hydration matters. A man alone makes stories out of the woods because stories are how we keep from being animals again. I said all that out loud. It felt like reading a recipe after you've already burned the beans. Older folks have names for that particular patch of laurel. Laurel hell is the polite one. Miss Opal used to say the laurel will borrow what you bring in. Your knife, your temper, your step count, and bring it back when it feels like it. Bent. Luther, who traps whatever still tries to wander, swears if you cut a mark in there, it'll walk a few trees down by morning. I laughed at that when I first heard it. Now when I see a blaze in my hand's angle where it shouldn't be, I stop laughing long enough to listen for my boots where they don't belong. Weeks after, I started finding my own marks in other places. Not many, just enough. A diagonal notch on a tulip poplar along a ridge I hadn't been on since spring. The dirt thumbprint smudged as if a left-hander had pressed instead of me. That was the thing that gnawed at me. Mirror hand, mirror choices. In the laurel, I'd felt my feet want a way I didn't. In the house, I caught myself counting breaths in sets of 20 without meaning to, like I was still pushing between glossy leaves. I do that at the sink, the stove, at a red light. I catch myself leaving the path in my mind and then coming back to it with burrs on me. I avoid that slope now if I can. If I can't, I go with someone else. We talk just loud enough to be a line out. I keep my knife sheathed more than not. I don't blaze unless the ridge twists on me in a new way. And when I do it higher, lighter, where bark can swallow it without remembering me too much. When I sleep, I sometimes wake with the taste of iron and crushed bay in my mouth and a thumb stuck forward like I'm about to press a berry into damp. I don't have a moral here either. The laurel doesn't owe me one. I got my roots that day, though I don't recall digging them. They were in the pack when I made it to the truck, mud still clinging like a seal. Maybe that's the part that keeps me honest. Somebody in there had my back, or my front, or my day before mine. Or the laurel just brought back what it borrowed. Either way, if you go early, go light, and don't count steps out loud unless you want something else keeping time with you. I learned to read air before I learned to read instruments. A gauge will give you a number, but air tells you a story if you'll lay your cheek to it. 30 years underground, you stop trusting eyes and start trusting the way sweat cools on your neck when the intake is clean. The way your lips dry on a return that's got something in it shouldn't. People think miners are listening for explosions. Most days you're listening for nothing, the kind of nothing that has edges. It's the quiet that changes first. Slady number 3 was never a brag seam. Low where it mattered, crumbly where it didn't, the kind of place your back learns new cuss words. We ran the mains out like ribs and silked crosscuts between them, chalk white from rock dust. Numbers in grease pencil blinking out of the dust like house numbers in fog. Roof bolts winked when your cap lamp caught them. Water lay in old ruts like black glass. Intake hummed like a cheap refrigerator. Returns had the tired breath of a thing that had worked all day and would work all night whether you fussed or not. We had a seal built across the old left-hand panel. Kennedy blocks mortared tight. Foam in the seams. A square of Brattis hung like a skirt on our side to direct the little bit of bleeder air past it. There's a telltale YouTube manometer hung there, colored water trembling an inch one way or the other to prove we'd built our choke right. Mostly it sat, bored and plumb. On days a thunder low walks the ridge and presses a hand on the county. Minds breathe. Barometric pressure drops. Sealed places give up or take in air. You can hear it if you're the kind who puts an ear where other folks won't. I was making second shift rounds when I decided to check that seal. It was a job nobody told me to do, the kind you do because you don't like surprises after midnight. We'd shut the miner down on the section. The man trip had taken the... I shouldn't have put my ear to the Brattis, I know that. That cloth had the cold of cave on it, that clean mineral chill that wraps your teeth. My cheek went numb in the shape of the seam behind it, those little ripples where we'd stretched and stapled it tight. The breath came slow through the weave. I matched it without thinking. Out by, in by, the way you count cuts with a buddy, the way you keep from thinking too hard. My head filled with that borrowed rhythm until my own lungs forgot they were on their own time. At first it was just sound. The long shh of a push, the long hutch of a draw, edges rounded by distance and cloth. But when you hold a single note long enough, it breaks into parts. You start hearing vowels in the hiss of air, ho, low, the ooh of a low flute. The mind makes words where there aren't any. I know that. Still, the cool threaded itself into syllables that made a meaningful shape with my breath. If I waited half a heartbeat and then exhaled, the exhale on the other side lifted in time and dragged a consonant like it knew what to do with my mouth. Not speech, close to speech. A habit of speech, left behind by men who had talked into that same air 1,000 nights when the Brattis was only a curtain to keep dust down, not a seal against the gone places. My gas sniffer chirped once in my pocket, a light green flicker. I pulled it up like a priest raises his book. Oxygen sat at 19.6 and lazied down to 19.4, a hair shy of what makes smart minds stupid. Methane a whisper with no teeth. Carbon monoxide at 0, which is always a lie in a mine if only because a memory of it is stuck in your nose forever. I told myself the low O2 was making the edges of things more suggestive. I put my cheek back anyway. The Brattis didn't just breathe, it talked in pulls. Low, slow, hold. I did not hear my name, I did not hear any name. There was no dead man asking for water. There was a cadence, though, like the start of a prayer before the words come, the gathering sound we make before we say something hard. The manometer line walked back and forth like a finger thinking. The vein on my anemometer whirred steady, then dragged, like wind over corduroy at a slant. I matched again and heard something like out by, a miner's words broken down to the bones they were built from. In by, out by, in, out. Old language stripped to breath. Somewhere out by, a door slammed the way air doors do when a man forgets to latch them again. The pressure wave came through like a polite truck drove past. The Brattis bowed into me and the cloth went taut enough to press a seam of cold into my mouth. Dust lifted, not mine dust, rock dust. Chalk smell, old flower smell. In my lamp beam it wrote itself into shapes like handwriting just before you focus. I blinked and the letters broke into flecks again. I put my glove between my face and the cloth and took my breath back from it. Something behind the seal kept going without me. It had taken my rhythm and didn't need me now. I cracked the little inspection flap, just a thumb of it, just to see, because that's how we are, and peered. There's a black in old panels that eats your light and gives you nothing back, a velvet that feels warm even when the air is cold. This one gave me a strip of white along the floor and the wet shine of rails half sunk. The air in there said cellar apples and iron, the good cold that never knows day. My sniffer trilled again, O2 at 19.3. And I had that bad feeling you get when your own lungs are the thing you can't get away from. The Brattis tugged against my glove in an exhale like a big animal deciding to sleep. It pulled a last word through the cloth without sound. You hear a shape sometimes, not a sound. The shape it made was don't, which is a thing in a man's head before it's anything a mind can say. I backed away, as if backing away would take the listening out of my ears. The entry suddenly had hard angles again. Bolt plates, chalked numbers, the line of moisture creeping along the floor like a map line. My radio hissed once without voice. I told myself not to be melodramatic, that I'd stood too close too long to a cloth meant to breathe for me, and I'd let it. There's no rule that says you can't fall a little in love with steady things and miss the part where they change. At the out-by stopping, I wrote down what made sense. Pressure drift low to high, vein slow then steady, oxygen borderline but not foolish, door slam out by. 3 lines, as if logging it right would make it settle. I didn't write that I let the mind teach me how to breathe. I didn't write that it took over when I stepped back, like a song you leave in a church that keeps going without you. I signed my tag and rode the man trip out with my lamp off, guessing the stops by the way the air cooled at each crosscut and warmed again, where the beltline ghosts still threw their heat. Up top, the sky had tired itself out of a storm and gone clear like a glass of water left in a window. I could taste chalk at the back of my throat. My jaw had that ache you get from biting down at funerals. The boss waved his cigarette and said "Borrow pumping tonight," and looked at the YouTube log like it owed him an apology. I nodded because his version worked if you didn't like to think about anything else. He asked if I heard anything weird. I said only the mind doing what minds do. He laughed at that, a little sharp, like he didn't want me to mean it. At home, I thought I'd be glad to hear ordinary machines. The fridge compressor kicked on, and I was on my feet without meaning to be, as if it had put its hand on my mouth. The furnace woke and shook the ducting, and the hair on my arms stood up like I'd stepped back against Brattis with my eyes closed. The first breath of a furnace is a kind of steel. It takes the room first and gives back the temperature later. I stood over the register with my palm out like a school kid, and it took my hand's heat and threw me cool with a little whisper underneath that had the exact pitch of a word I wasn't going to say out loud in my own house. I shut it down. The whole system, more force than necessary, the way you close a door on a room you won't look into anymore. I tried to science my way out of it. Fans make vowels. Any steady noise does. Fridge oscillations sit in a range the ear turns into ghost syllables because the brain hates randomness. Drop the O2 a hair and the world goes suggestive. Barometric pressure changes don't just move air. They work on you. You can stand in a mine long enough to think you hear a prayer and walk into a kitchen that asks for nothing and hear the same thing. That's on me, not on the house and not on Slady. And yet, when the weather breaks up toward evening, when the ridge puts its shadow on the valley and the trailers light their windows like boats, there's a time the vents in every building I've ever been in take a little breath. Stores, churches, the post office. It's the same syllable every time. The start of a word we use too much and never finish. Hold, low, no. I keep my distance from registers now and heat with the stove when I can. I like a flame you can see take what it takes, not a machine that decides when we breathe together. I sleep with a window cracked all year like a cheat. The winter air hurries to the floor and stays where I can see it in my breath if I wake up wrong. I still go down. I told myself for a while I wouldn't, and that held for a season. Then a man calls and says they need a body who knows the maze by ear, and I say I'm no body, and he laughs that tired laugh we all learn, and I go. I check seals like a man puts a hand on a dog's ribs to be sure. I listen. I don't lay my cheek on Bratis anymore. Not on purpose. Some nights, stove off, house ticking, I hear the furnace's first breath even when it's cold. I feel the cloth on my mouth that isn't there. Maybe that's just how long it takes air to let a man go after he's given his cheek to it. Maybe I'm still borrowing my breath from a seam that doesn't owe me one. Either way, whatever is on the other side of any door, mine, yours, Slady's, has a way of learning our rhythms if we lay close. That's true enough to be a warning or a comfort, depending who you are. I've painted more porch ceilings than I've slept good nights. There's a particular tilt to your head when you're rolling above you, and a particular pinch to the neck. And somewhere in there the shade of blue folks ask for more than any other. Haint blue, sky in a bucket, grandmother's one rule blue, starts feeling like a thing you can smell. Old women will touch the color sample with 2 fingers and say, that one, it keeps them out. I don't argue with either version of that sentence, what it keeps out or who says it keeps. I've seen a color change a summer. The Walker place sat up on a shelf above a bend in the creek where the water wore the bedrock smooth like old soap. House older than the road, long porch with beadboard overhead and rafters that showed their nails like old teeth. The first day I walked up the steps with my bucket and my sander, I saw all the mirrors inside face down under quilts. That stuck with me. You can't help but notice when a house refuses its own face. Mrs. Walker had a way of not explaining on purpose. We keep them down when the sky's confused, she said, as if the sky had moods like a person. She was thin the way grief thins you, edges showing through. The only other thing she asked, besides the color, was this. Don't start at the front door. Start at the far end. Work toward the road. I mixed my own haint blue from habit, even though you can buy any shade you want in a can now. It takes a little ultramarine, a breath of green, and then milked with white until it sits in your eye the way morning sits on a cold day. I'll thin just enough to lay smooth. Scrape the old paint down till the wood lifts splinters like little breaths, sand the splinters, prime with stain block if there's bleed, and then roll and tip off with a sash brush. A ceiling holds the past, the smoke from 1,000 summer stoves, nicotine, candle soot, wasp stain, rain-blown in say. D-ways, and you have to forgive it all before you tell it the sky again. First morning was foggy. You could hear cows across the river talk to one another like mourners. I set ladders, draped drop cloths, took a scraper to the worst of the flakes, and the porch breathed sawdust and old soap into me, like we were getting acquainted. When I opened the gallon, the blue woke up. Some colors seemed to lean forward before you touched them. My brush took, and the first stroke went on like silk. I thought, good wood, good day. But when I crossed back to lay off the lap marks, the paint had beads on it, not bubbles like moisture from a wash job done late. Not fish eyes like you get from silicone, but perfect round beads like sweat on a cold jar brought into a hot room. The boards looked wet from the inside. I pressed the bristles into the beading to break the surface tension, and the color ran thin like it had been watered. I blamed the morning. We're proud of our dew here. It makes spider work look like jewelry. Dew will cue your finish if you push it. I waited, drank my coffee, sanded a different corner, and came back to the work when the fog lifted into blue air. It took then. The next section laid smooth and sat there calm, and I found a rhythm. Any job shakes you around the first hour. By afternoon, I had the back half of the porch turned to bright, and I stood in the yard and looked up at my work and watched a wavering sheen pull across the paint like breath on glass. I reached up and pressed a finger in near a seam. It didn't hold my print. It didn't hold anything. Inside the open front door, a quilt hung across the hall like a curtain. I could see the outline of a mirror under it, tall and thin. I told myself the house needed less light reflected into it. That was all. Mrs. Walker brought me lemonade and looked past me like I wasn't there. The blue on the ceiling kept a wet shine until the sun slid behind the first line of trees, and then it looked dry as sugar. I packed up before I started finding reasons to touch it again. You learn not to tempt a finish into telling you it lied. The next morning I pressed my thumb into yesterday's work before I climbed the ladder. It should have been chalk dry. Nail your cap to it dry. Instead, I felt my print fill with cool and then float back out. It wasn't sticky. It was as if the wood exhaled under the skin of blue and smoothed itself after I let go. When I brushed a spot that had beaded the day before, the paint parted around the bristles like oil and only grudgingly closed again behind me. I blamed grease in the wood, a kitchen wall's long history of steam sneaking out summers. I wiped with vinegar water, waited, tried a coat of shellac to lock tannins and old years in place. The shellac lay down like glass and stayed tacky, the way air stays heavy before a storm. By noon, the shade had rotated just so, and the far right panel above the swing started crying little lines of blue that shook themselves into round drops at the seam where two boards met. It looked wrong in a quiet way. Paint falls. Everybody knows that. It runs down. I've wiped my share of sags. But this gathered itself trembling and then pulled back up into the crack like something thirsty was on the other side and had sent a tongue to test. I leaned close until the sawdust on the brush handle tickled my nose and could smell a faint sweetness, like baby's breath water gone soured. I could hear the tiny sound it made, a hush-hush, like hair pulled through fingers. I took a napkin from my lunch and touched the bead. It soaked the blue and left the wood dry under it. I lifted the napkin and watched the color rise out of the paper and bell back into a dot on the seam. That's not a trick, I know. I put the napkin in my pocket and told myself I was already painting stories into it because of the mirrors and the quilt and the way Mrs. Walker's footsteps didn't make a sound on the hall floorboards. I said humidity out loud like it was a prayer. Dew point, silicone residue, tannic bleed, sap in pitch pockets, old wax someone had put up there long ago to keep wasps from chewing. Pick a reason and talk sweet to it. I moved my ladder closer to the front door like a man edging toward an exit without looking like he's leaving. The quilt in the hall had slipped a little, showing the top inch of the mirror under it. A beveled edge chipped once like a tooth. The glass held a fog from the wrong side. You know the look when you breathe on a mirror? That nearest place your mouth has to your face? That, but behind the plate, pushing at the silvering. I didn't uncover it. I told myself, you don't work inside, you're outside, you're selfish to make more work for your hands. I brushed a clean straight line along the eave and my own hand brushed me, a half second after, in the glass that wasn't supposed to be seeing me. I looked because men always look when we've already told ourselves we won't. The quilt swung in a draft I couldn't feel, and the forgotten mirror showed a slanted rectangle of sky under my ladder, the sky in the ceiling, too bright, haint bright, the exact shade I was laying, only lit like an electric sign. There are sensible ways paint misbehaves, and they all come with a smell or a sheen you can fight. Fish eyes from silicone, blush like oil rings. You can sand and spin a new coat if you like. Blush humidity puts a cloud in lacquer that parts when you warm it. A gloss will stay gummy if you put it over a waxed surface. I know those languages. This wasn't any of them. This felt like the boards weren't taking a story I knew but telling one back. A story in breath. Every time I put a stroke down, a kind of damp rose from the joints and laid a hand on the paint, the way someone you love will put their palm on your sleeve while your mouth is still forming the worst part of the news. I knocked off early that day and came back at sundown with a box fan, an old electric heater, and the kind of stubborn you scrape off the bottoms of certain jobs. Mrs. Walker watched from the steps with her hands folded under her sweater in a way that didn't make her look cold. I set the fan to push through the porch and the heater to take the damp edge off. The air moved obediently. The paint shivered once and then settled into that wet shine that reads to the eye like finished until you touch it. I touched it. It took my print and let it go again, like two fingers pressed through a veil and then withdrawn. I cleaned my brush out back by the spigot and laid the bristles flat in their sleeve the way I always do. By the time I wrapped them in the black cloth I keep for my good brushes, the hair had stuck together as if someone had breath-dried them. They smelled like iron and flowers. I finished the job on paper. That's the neat way to put it. By the third day, the front half of the porch wore its new sky, the edges cut clean around the crown mold, the beadboard fat with color, the rafters shaded. From the yard, you'd swear the house was wearing Sunday. If you stepped up, if you touched a knuckle, to the corner where the ceiling met the post, your skin would learn the fact the paperwork didn't want, it never cured, not sticky like bad gloss, not wet like you caught a drip. Just a living skin, always new, always a breath away from hard, but never taking a final set, the way grief sits in a house, the last thing to dry. I tried every reason on it after hours. I sanded a small square to bare wood and sealed it with shellac-tinted amber so I could see the edge of my fix. The sealer stayed young under my thumb. I wiped a peroxide wash for mold that wasn't there. I blessed it with ammonia like an old neighbor swears to. I even cut out one piece of beadboard from the worst corner, milled a new square at home, primed it, painted it, and brought it back in the truck. The new wood dried in the bed on the drive up, hard to the tap by the time I hit the county line, and it went fussy as soon as I set it into the hole. The nails rang like I'd tapped a jar with a spoon. The paint shivered on the edge and went to sheen. The house took a breath in. That's the closest I'll come to saying it out loud. I could rationalize 10 ways, and none of them made me sleep. Even when something is strange, it still obeys physics. That was my comfort argument. Heat and moisture, vapor pressure, capillaries in old-growth pine pulling and pushing. Boards like lungs. The porch faces the river breathes with night and day. A porch ceiling is the house's soft mouth. It exhales what it exhaled all summer. 100 years of cooking steam, tobacco and talk, songs that were supposed to be private. Maybe I laid color over a breath that wasn't ready to quit. If you think I'm romanticizing it, I'd like to show you the napkin I shouldn't have kept, folded in my glove box, still with a dot of blue that won't dry and won't wipe off on my thumb, no matter how many months and heat cycles it's seen. I key it out when I need to feel foolish and put it back when foolish is too close to true. The mirrors stayed down. I wanted to ask why. I didn't. If you've ever been in a room with someone who moved the photographs face down before you walked in, you know the feeling. On the last day, when I was picking up drop cloths and she was counting me out in cash in those old 20s that have barns on them, a little corner of the hall quilt had turned itself up like a lip. I saw the mirror's fog again, close as skin. My blue looked brighter in the glass than on the ceiling. Haint bright, the way electric signs look in a storm, alive and wrong and begging a moth. I turned the cloth back down without thinking. My hand shook, a small tremor that belonged to someone else. Mrs. Walker thanked me without looking. It didn't feel like relief when I left. It felt like walking away from a job that had finished me. After that, I wrapped my good bristles in black cloth, like I'm putting a towel over a birdcage for the night. I keep a mirror in my house face down where it is when I'm not shaving. It's not superstition so much as manners. I don't paint porch ceilings alone now. I take a boy with a radio, and we talk with our mouths busy so the boards don't try to borrow our breath. When a client asks for haint blue, I mix it a shade duller without saying and pretend I can keep any bright thing from calling its own kind. If someone tells me their paint won't dry, I start with humidity and dew point, with tannin and silicone, and the way old wax can make a finish fisheye until you feel like you're painting a lake. And if their voice has that space in it, like a person listening for a back-of-the-house door moving by itself, I tell them politely I'm booked into October, which is true. Every now and then, I pass the Walker place. In late day, the porch keeps a lit look even when the sun's not on it, as if it's storing extra sky for nights that run long. I've learned to stop looking. You'd on cold mornings when the first heat comes out of my vents and takes the warmth off my hand, I think about the way that ceiling smoothed its own thumbprint back out, the way the house made a skin over whatever it was keeping in. I hear a tiny hush in the ductwork that belongs on a porch in summer. Maybe a house is nothing but the shapes we put into it, and sometimes those shapes don't want to level off. Or maybe certain colors or doors and certain boards remember how to breathe. I can live with not knowing. I can't live with gloss that never cures. So I wrap the brushes in black, keep my mirrors kind, and leave a window cracked even in winter, so what needs to leave can find a way that isn't through my hands. Mama asked in that soft way she saves for when she already knows my answer. June revival by the river, she said, like naming a place is the same as inviting a person. Sycamores threw pale bones up the bank, shed bark like paper skin. Cars lined the gravel in crooked angles. Somebody's generator throbbed behind a hay wagon that had been made into a stage with 2 speakers and a microphone that would pop when the damp took it. The smell was every summer smell at once. Sun on wet rock, cut grass, mustard on egg, hot plastic from the extension cord, perfume off a woman who believed in both God and Avon. I told myself I was there because she asked, which is true, also because there's a kind of quiet you only get near moving water, where your own noise gets taken and reused. She took my arm like she used to, and we stepped down the dusty path to the sandbar, where baptisms happen when the river's right. Shoes off, pants rolled. The sand went from sift to crush, and then to that slick where it takes your foot by the arch and makes a friend of you whether you like it or not. Mud was warm between my toes in pockets that felt like a body had been there first and just moved. Fish the size of your hand sparked and dimmed and were gone. Brother Amos had on the same white shirt he always has, sleeves banded at his biceps like he means business. Folks gathered in clumps, old women on folding chairs, men in hats they'd sleep in, kids daring the water with stick swords. The singing started in that tentative way, someone's alto finding the first note and other voices walking up to it like a porch. The hymn rode the water easy. Shall we gather at the river, where bright angel feet have trod? I've heard it my whole life and never felt how strange it is to sing about feet while your own are going numb and warm by turns. There were rattles under the first verse, not loud, a dry little whisper. In the stones, like a gourd with seed in it shaken inside the riverbed. Someone behind us shook an actual shaker, mason jar with pebbles, to keep time, and for a minute I let my mind put every sound in a hand. Mama's fingers put a crease in my shirt sleeve and held on. She whispered that she liked the sycamores here, how they look like the inside of a rib cage, and I nodded like I agreed, because I did, because you could stand under them and feel held and hollowed at once. Brother Amos waded out to his middle, his trousers clinging to his thighs like a second kind of hair. He found his stance against the pole the way a man who's done this a long time learns to lean. The current brushed the backs of my calves like a bent broom. It felt honest at first, river always telling the same truth about down. But in the little trough where my feet had made their decision and set, something stroked the opposite way, a friendly goat head pushing up into a hand. It wasn't enough to move me. It was enough to remark on, if you're the kind of person who keeps track of where forces belong. When the first woman walked into the river in her long dress with her hair unpinned, the crowd breathed like a single set of lungs. I did too, though I don't claim lungs with them anymore. Her mouth shaped the words we all knew. The water, that good ache that makes you aware of every bone, pressed her dress against her shins from the wrong side. Amos spoke in that low way he has, all vowels, no edges, and when he laid her down, the sound under the hymn lifted its face a little, the tiny rattle tightening into a sound with teeth. I told myself it was just gravel rolling. I tell myself small things that keep me standing where I am. There's an art to holding a stranger's face underwater long enough to count a blessing and not long enough to count regret. Amos has the art. He cradled the next boy, bigger than a boy, really, with a high school mustache trying its best, and when the boy went down the river, took him in pieces, first the head, then the shoulders, and then something like a hand at the small of his back easing him toward the wrong direction. Amos corrected for it with a little pull and a turn. He didn't look surprised, just older. I stepped forward without meaning to, knee-deep and then thigh, to be a body if a body was needed. It put the back of my knee in the cold seam where the creek comes in, that shock that makes you swear without sound. The pressure flowed the way it always flows, and then, when the hymn dipped to its minor line, it moved up, gentle and insistent, the way a child will put its head under your hand when it wants you to keep the petting going. It wasn't a wave. Waves lie to you and then leave. This was a pulse that learned. It timed itself to the slow swing of Brother Amos's forearm and the way we all paused for breath between God's name and the next word. Out of the corner of my eye, a line of silt marks on the wet hem of a woman's dress crept upward like someone writing in ash with a finger. The rattles under the hymn thickened. The shaker behind us had stopped, and the man holding it had his eyes closed. But the sound kept its place right at ankle depth, more felt than heard. 1,000 tiny beads rolling in a bowl and never coming to rest. I looked down. The river turned fish scale gray where my legs broke it. Pebbles shifted in a slow circle around my feet as if the water were kneading them into me. A leaf pinned itself to my shin, jerked like it wanted to go downstream, then folded neatly against the current and slid up. It wasn't wind. You don't have wind in the river. For a second, Longer than a blink, the surface ahead of Amos took on a ropey look, like a muscle stiffening under skin. A seam in the flow divided, held its shape, the way oil does on soup if you haven't stirred it, and inside that seam the light was a different color, amber like tea in a jar. My mouth went dry with river in it. I tried to step back. Mud had made friends with me. It had half my foot and wanted a bit more. The pressure at my calves leaned into me with the weight of someone learning the footprint of a dance. I said it out loud under the sound of the hymn. Nope. It made a small noise in the bigger noise, a chip in the wood that the river sanded smooth. A girl went under and came up shouting, which isn't the usual style in this crowd, and her eyes were wide and bright in a way that made me think of a calf new to its feet. She said oh, and then laughed so she wouldn't cry. The rattles laughed too, if a dry thing can be said to laugh. They ticked against my skin like the tongues of all the bottle caps ever nailed to all the dance hall floors. I put my hand on Amos's elbow the way you steady a man who doesn't need steadying and felt him steady me back with a grip that said, "Don't make it about you." He dipped his head like a man listening for thunder in the ground. When it was our turn to slosh out and leave the space to other knees and other mouths, I felt the press travel with me. You expect to walk yourself free of water the way you walk yourself free of a bad thought. Next step, wait, release. But the river kept suggesting its direction against my ankles even when I stood in sunned sand. It tugged at the hem of my jeans like shy fingers. I turned my shoes upside down to knock out the grit, and a neat line of pebbles rang against the toe like a shake of a child's toy. The sound lodged under the end notes of the last verse and didn't quit when the amen did. Mama didn't take her hand off my sleeve until we were on the bank and she could say, quietly so God didn't hear it wrong, "Do you feel that?" By the time I got home, my shins were ringed with the kind of grit that only river water leaves, a paste of ground rock that gets in your hair and stays even after soap. I set my shoes by the door with their tongues open like dogs and the laces spread, and somehow they looked like mouths. I was tired in that good, sun-hurt way. The kitchen smelled like cornmeal and old wood. There was a quiet to the house that should have felt like shelter and instead felt like the pause between two measures waiting for whoever was keeping time to pick it up again. It did. Somewhere under the trailer, near where the ducks run and the graywater pipe finds the slope it needs, a rattle started. Not loud, not brave. A dry whisper that learned my ear in under a minute. It came in 3 small runs and then took a breath, the rhythm of a hand that doesn't want to be caught showing off but can't stop. I thought, June bugs in the tin underbelly. I thought, the neighbor's kid left his bike out and the wind found something on it that knows about rhythm. I thought every small thought that makes a bigger thought the last one you have to entertain. It was not bugs. The sound moved where bugs don't move, sideways along the line of the floor, to the place under the couch, then to the front door like a polite knock laid near your shoe, and then backed away to see what you'd do. I stepped into the shoe with my right foot to see if a pebble would tell on itself, and the arch of the shoe lifted to meet me, warm. A little line of grit rolled under my toes and sorted itself into 3 ticks, paused to listen, and did it again. I took my foot out and turned the shoe over. A fish scale, small as a thumbnail, held the light and let it go. It shouldn't have been there. It shouldn't have survived the walk up from the river and the ride in the truck and my half hour on the porch, but there it was, a coin from a queue. Rentsy, I don't spend anymore. I put it in the ashtray where loose screws and bad pennies go. It stuck to my thumb when I tried to let it go. At 2 a.m., which is when a trailer makes its decisions, metal cooling, pressure equalizing, every cheap seam telling the truth, the rattle found words, not real words. I'm not making the river into a mouth. But the duct under the bedroom took a breath that pulled the sheet against my shin, and the sound said the rhythm of the hymn without melody. Not the tune, the cadence, the little hesitations where people decide if they believe what they're saying. In the dark, it felt like the river had kept a fingerprint of my ankle bones and was rolling it under its thumb, testing if I fit. I lay there breathing against it the way you breathe against pain, and found myself changing my breath to see if it would change. When I sped up, it did. When I held at the top, it waited, and then a tiny slide of grit in the shoe by the door finished the sentence we hadn't started. I tried all the rational ways in the morning. I slid under the trailer with a headlamp and a bad pad for my back and found the usual lives. Spiders that make a harp out of their webs, moth husks, a possum track that looked like a child's hand, a gnaw on a joist where a toothache had been cured. The cinder block piers wore dark collars like something had lapped them in the night. The low spots under the ducked elbows were damp in neat circles, unhelpfully clean. No snake, no nest. I tapped the duct. The house answered like a drum with spots you can't find again. I put down bait for mice I didn't have and vowed to pick it up before the wrong thing ate it. My shoes were dry by then. They still whispered when I touched them together, heel to heel. Mama called around lunch and asked how I slept like a person who knows the right answer to her own question. I told her what I could say without sounding like I was making more of it. She said, "It follows some folks home. The water's got a good memory when it wants one. Sometimes it picks a man like a hound does. A smell, a step, the way you stand in it. Don't let it hear your name after dark." She said it like she was giving common sense advice about wet floors. I asked if she believed in all that. She said belief is what we call manners when we're scared. Then she asked me to bring her the jar she'd left in the back seat of my truck, empty, clean, the kind you put beans in. That night the rattle came soft as rain you hear and pretend you don't. It went to the same places under the same parts of the house at the same times, as if there were a map in the ducts I couldn't see. I slept with a window cracked, the way I've been doing since Slady taught me about breath. The cool made its own river on the floor. Sometime toward morning I dreamed I was at the sandbar with my shoes on my hands and the sycamores bent close as if to listen. When I woke, my hands smelled like iron and clean mud. The fish scale in the ashtray lay there bright as a coin and refused to dry. I don't have a lesson. If it's God, he has a sense of touch I don't understand. If it's the river, it learned my count the way Laurel did. If it's just the way water and houses talk, I'm the one at the register overhearing. I don't say the hymn after dark. I keep my shoes by the door with the tongues out, and sometimes at 2 a.m. the house finishes a line I didn't start and lets me sleep anyway. Quiet pays the same as noise. That was the pitch, and I took it. The mill had been dead 10 years by the time I got the key, a big, soft brass thing that made the padlocks look heavier than they are. This valley remembers noise. If you close your eyes, you can still hear the green chain chatter, board dogs clicking, the long whine of the head saw pulling a cant through like a bad tooth. Now the buildings sit like cattle in shade. Tin roof, sawdust silo with a rust hedgehog ring at its lip, fan houses on the kiln like organ pipes. They breathe with weather and nothing else. I walk from 10 to 6 with a thermos and a little flashlight that's stubborn about dying slow. The owners lost copper twice the winter they called me, and they'd had enough of scrappers skinning wire like fruit. So I put a boots and paper kind of watch on it, check gates, tug door chains, sign the column on a clipboard nobody will read twice. There's a break room with safety posters, sun faded to pale ghosts, a microwave that smells like a memory of soup, and a pair of hard hats on a hook with headbands that still know the shape of men who don't come anymore. A single emergency circuit runs the exit signs and the night lights. Everything else is tagged out, lockout bars fat with locks like charms on a bad bracelet. The floor inside is a history book written in powder. Old sawdust goes sour, mouse sweet and gray. New sawdust smells like someone cut open a cold lemon. You wouldn't think 10 years could teach a place to have two different kinds of dust, but it can. The head rig still stands like a cathedral piece. Big wheel, taut bandsaw once. Then a great circle blade in the last years, teeth sitting like a grin with its lips off. Men left their handprints in pitch along the guard and the operator's rail. The planers are still lined up, heads hooded, tables ribbed and pitted where a million boards went through. Oh, slab pile long gone. Stickers stacked by the wall like game pieces a bored giant forgot to put away. There's a tower light on the old saw console, red over amber over green, the sort that used to glow whenever the mill was ready to eat. I told myself first night it'd never go again unless somebody put a new bulb in and a current to suit. It's funny what a man will pick to reassure himself. That green, when it was lit, meant run. It meant your heart put a layer of shellac on itself and crawled up behind your eyes so you didn't get caught in your own hand. You hear plenty, even alone. Heat comes off the roof and drops across your shoulders like a damp coat about midnight. Gulls that found the landfill will sometimes make a mistake and circle the silo like there's still a feed here for them. The conveyor belting sighs when the building cools. Rollers make single notes when their bearing grease remembers it was once designed to be a liquid. If you lay a finger on the dead blade, just lay it. The steel holds the same cold whether it's August or January, a cold that lives in metal and not in weather. I keep my hands in my pockets because if you start touching out here, you start listening differently. Down by the office door is a time clock in a dented sheet metal skin, card racks on either side like a library for hands. There's still a line of cards in the far slots, curled at the top where moisture got them. Names pencil faded. Earl, L.T. Dennis, 2 Bryans, one with a Y where there ought to be an I. Somebody's card says out on both columns for the last day the mill ran like he wanted to be sure. The clock is unplugged. I checked. The cord is coiled and zip-tied to itself like a snake that learned its lesson. I wrote that down, not in the log, just in my head. I like to know which mouths can't bite. For a week the place was nothing but sheet metal pops in my own boots and a raccoon the size of a buffalo that lives under the chip conveyor. On the 8th night, With the wind down and fog too lazy to lift off the yard, the console tower's green winked, as if someone with small hands had pinched the filament into a glow. Not bright, not steady, just a frog's eye opening and closing in the graphite dark. I told myself it was a reflection off my own lamp. I told myself a lot all at once because the blade, dead and still, had started to hum the way a big circle will hum if a man thinking about it stands too close to it with his chest tuned to wrong. It was a note too low to have a letter. I set my thermos down, and it made that small, hollow sound an empty thing makes, and the clock down by the office swallowed. Chew is the word for it. Anyone who's ever worked a punch clock knows. Not ding, not stamp. Chew, metal jaw on card, ratchet stepping, ribbon giving one little tired cough of ink. It was a sound that belonged in a building with heat in it, a sound that pulls you inside your own shoulders because it means you're late or you're on time, but you were supposed to be somewhere else. I went down the catwalk slow, not because I'm brave in installments, but because I've learned round corners are where you find the men with bolt cutters if you're going to find them at all. The green on the tower light tried to be a color and failed. It flickered like an idea. The blade's hum thickened when I came even with it and softened when I slipped past, as if my ribs were an instrument it remembered playing. The smell changed. Old sawdust has a mouse vinegar note you learn without trying. This was resin, bright and a little citrus, and it hit me right under the breastbone where smells go straight to the part of your life you didn't mean to keep. There was a path across the floor that he hadn't been there at 10. I knew the tone of it before my lamp proved it. The yellow of it like straw, like the sun in a jar. Fresh, not a drift of old finds that does what wind wants, but a slim ribbon of new dust across the toffee dark of a decade's dirt. It ran like a line a board would take off the green chain, under the guard that would have been down, along the roll case past the first kickers. Kneeling, I put 2 fingers into it. It clung and then went stringy between them the way sap will. A little strand drawing itself thinner and thinner until you can't see it, but you can feel it keep being there. I put my fingers against my teeth without thinking. I could taste evergreen and iron. The clock chewed again. Kerchunk, pause, a little wheeze, kerchunk. Cards slid in their racks somehow, like teeth do in a mouth, one nudging the next. The ones nearest my hand looked old as dirt. The far side, fresh white edges, and the little trapezoid ears that come on new time cards where you tear them loose from the pad. I shifted my flashlight to my chin, freed both hands, and put 2 fingers on the clock housing. No buzz, no heat. The cord, still zip-tied, still cut clean from the wall, hung fat and stupid. The machine ate another blank all the same. I looked down at the floor because men do that when they can't look at the thing that ought not be. The dust ribbon widened at the end of the roll case, thinned, opened into a scatter the size and shape of the mouth to the head saw. In my lamp, teeth showed one by one, dull with old pitch, bright with a smear that wasn't there yesterday. A single blonde curl, plainer shavings, angel hair, not the coarse bite of a head saw, hung from a guard that hadn't turned since the day the bankman shook hands and then washed his palm in the men's room without making eye contact. I told myself raccoons. I told myself a sack of absorbent popped and a forklift I hadn't seen dragged it along. Except the forklifts are all noses up with their forks on the floor, batteries gone, tires slumped like old cheeks. I told myself wind. There isn't enough wind inside a mill to lay a line that straight unless you count the wind of a thing that used to be here. I told myself stray current. Capacitors holding a decade of grudge and burping it out for me like a trick. I stood there and counted the beat under everything else. Kerchunk, throat, kerchunk, and realized my heart had gotten itself in time with it, same way a mind's breathing will catch a man who puts his cheek to it. I broke rhythm. The green on the tower light paused, then guttered, then revived as if I'd choked and it was asking whether to keep singing. The last card came out of the mouth with a satisfaction, a finishing sound, like a dog turning 3 times and lying down. I didn't want to look at the name line. I looked anyway. The name was mine, in my own hand, not printed. My cursive, slow and too careful the way it is when I have to write something that matters. The timestamp read 0003. The ink so faint it looked like a bruise. The date wheel thought it was a year that would have made me a much younger man. I put my thumb on the card to warm it out of being weird, which is how I handle paper that has too much to say, and the paper warmed without my help. The edges were gritty with sawdust that hadn't existed before midnight. I walked the sawdust line like it would be impolite to step off it. It led me exactly where a man with a cant in his hands would go, past the kickers, up the incline where the dogs used to grab, to the mouth where the blade would bite. The mouth held cold even in June. My lamp picked out a smear on one tooth that looked wet until the beam moved and then looked dry again. I reached because of course I did, and the pitch on my fingertip tugged at my skin like it had a say in whether we were done. Behind me the clock chewed a phantom last bite and quit polite. The green on the tower light steadied one long blink and went. The blade kept humming, but now that I had my hand on it, I knew the hum was in my bones. I walked the rounds after that with the weird dignity of a man pretending his heart rate is something he chooses. The log got the same neat checks and times it always did. All secure, gates locked, no sign of entry. I did not write, "Your clock ate me." The path in dust was a private thing for an hour, and then the building changed its mind and softened it. By dawn, a cat's walk and a night breeze turned it to nothing a camera would notice. The pitch on my fingertip took mineral spirits like a confession and still wouldn't leave. I could smell Christmas in my hands at breakfast, that resin-bright hurt a tree gives you if you love it too sudden. There are explanations that hold for a while if you keep your face smooth. Ghost voltage will light an LED when a wire runs parallel to a live line and steals enough to say so. Big steel rings it does. You can make a blade sing with a thumb if you find its note, and a building that cools fast will make its share of music. A time clock could have a spring. It could have, I don't know what it could have. It didn't have a cord. It had my name. I put the card in the pocket of my jacket the way you put a thorn in a handkerchief so you won't forget to take it out later. When I got home, it was in my wallet, not my pocket. That's a trick my own hands play on me sometimes, but the dust along the card's edge had turned the inside of my billfold into a little act of carpentry. It smelled like a planer the hour a new set of knives goes in. Night after, nothing. Night after that, the tower light made one little frog eye again and stayed asleep. A week of ordinary, if you call a shuttered Mill's idea of ordinary something that doesn't lift the hair along your wrist every time you pass the head rig. Then, without drama, a neat line of bright fines lay from the dock door to the first set of rollers, and the clock coughed up 3 blanks and stopped before my rack. The last blank had a crease down its middle like someone had folded it tent style to stand it up for a man to read his own name. I covered the clock with a heavy trash bag and taped it hermetic, the way you wrap a mirror before a storm in a house where people have rules. I could still hear it under there when the building settled, soft, not trying to be brave. I told the owner about scrappers and raccoons and tracks that weren't there when I went to lunch. He told me he'd add 50 a week if I'd run the outside fence more often. People with money will always give you more of it if you agree to walk further from the thing that bothers you. I said sure. I started taking my breaks outside in the shed with the empty propane cages, where the wind bangs a door honest when it wants to say your name. Inside, the hum inside me didn't stop, not right away. It learned the sound of my truck heater. It learned the syllables of the refrigerator in my mother's kitchen and said them back to me like a promise I hadn't made out loud. The time card with my name lives under the seat of my truck now, wrapped in a rag that's seen turpentine and tears both. Sometimes when I drive past the mill in daylight and don't mean to think about it, I feel heat on my thigh like a phone buzzing, and I reach and the paper is warm, as if someone stamped it again 30 seconds ago and it remembered to be alive. On mornings after certain nights, there will be a fine comma of new dust. On the step of my porch, a little bright semicircle just where a man would drag his boot heel before he decides to go in. I sweep it without telling myself why. If I look close, there's a line in it like the teeth marks a feed roll leaves under a board's shine. I could quit, that's true. It wouldn't be the first job I've put down because I didn't like the way it put a hand on me, but it's a kind of debt I feel to places that held my family's hours. My uncle ran the Edger for 15 years and loses his breath when a planner starts up on TV now. My father said the mill took the space in his shoulders where ease ought to be. The building keeps time. That's what I think when I'm kind to myself about it. It keeps a beat so steady that a man who stands in it long enough starts to believe he's late every day of his life. When the green winks, I try not to watch. When the blade hums, I put my hands in my pockets and think of winter. When the clock chews, I count to 3 and breathe on the offbeat so whatever is keeping track doesn't think we agree. Max Patch is a bald, and that word means what it sounds like. Mountaintop shaved to scalp, grass instead of trees, the whole sky for a hat. I like it in cold months when the wind minds your business for you and tourists stay where the coffee is. The trail comes up mild, then kicks sudden. Your lungs find out if they're liars. Frost had that sugar glass look on the switchbacks, brittle glitter at your feet that makes you careful with your heel. I wasn't there for a reason nobler than air. Sometimes the house gets tight with its own breath, and the only cure is walking it out somewhere the wind can tell you when to inhale again. The day had broken clear as a jar, and by the time I topped the bald, the light was straight sideways, inching toward blue hour. A handful of tents already pinned themselves at the edge of the grass where the firs start again. A red one like a heart, a sun-faded orange like a traffic cone somebody loved. A couple from Florida asked me which way the sunrise belonged to. I pointed with my chin and kept going. If you talk too much up there, your words get taken and set down somewhere you won't recognize. It's a place that makes you whisper even if you don't believe in why. My father had a driveway whistle, the kind that packed a whole sentence into one line. "Come on, time to go, I'm not mad if you hurry." He could cut through summertime cicadas and our mother's name with it. I carried it around in my pocket for years after he went, pulling it out when I needed to make my own legs remember being called. You can feel foolish whistling alone on a hilltop. You can also feel less like the wind could pick you up and misfile you somewhere. I put 2 fingers to my mouth and let it out, low and clean, the way he had. A 2-note rise, then a fall with a little curl at the end that he did without thinking, and I can almost do. Coyotes were in my head before I made a sound, and that's why I whistled, to keep them there, a tangle of yips held at a distance by a tune I knew better than they did. The first answer I heard, I let the hill have his echo. The bald rolls down toward tree lines on 3 sides. Sound goes out, comes back wrong, takes 2 steps too long, because it has to climb a fir and a memory to get home to you. But the reply hit half a heartbeat later. Not the long delay of the far ridge, not the stutter you get off the stand of spruce where the trail ducks back into green, but a polite hesitation that felt like manners more than distance. It wasn't behind me or ahead or left or right. It was half beat late and almost right on pitch, which is worse than being wrong. The wind at that hour lies down, then stands up, then lies down again. My breath made a little ghost that wouldn't leave my face. I tried again, the same 2-note rise, the fall with that curl I can't always catch. The answer came like an old friend late to a joke, just in time to be in on it, too slow to make it theirs. I looked for some kid with a Bluetooth speaker and too much energy. Nobody moved. A dog by the orange tent put its chin on its paws and watched me the way dogs watch men who haven't decided what to do yet. It didn't scare me exactly. It made me feel attended to. The cold does that. You stand under a big sky and it's as if something without hands has its hands on your shoulders. I told myself it was the coulee of the hill shaping my own sound and handing it back. I tried a different whistle, a mess I made up that didn't belong to anyone living. The answer tried to match anyway, still that half-tick late, still with my father's timbre instead of mine, as if the hill skipped my voice and patched in the memory of a better one. I put my hands in my pockets and walked the ridge line slow. The dog followed me to the edge of where his tent rules end. Eden kept his head low, ears pressed to his own skull like he wanted the wind out. Night on the bald falls in layers, never a drop. The western mouth of the world darkened first, cold wine poured into a bowl. The fields below turned to a flat felt, and the towns, which nobody mentions until they need gas, stitched themselves together with yellow thread. People at their tents zipped things, shook sleeping bags that would betray them at 3 a.m., and spoke to headlamps instead of each other. I sat with my back to the last post where the trail marker has lost its paint, and I whistled my father's call because I don't know what else to do when the air feels too opinionated. The answer decided I wasn't joking. It came faster, quicker to match, that same half-breath behind, and the pitch sat on the edge of mine like a moth next to a match without getting burned. I turned my whole body to my right and whistled soft like you would to a horse. The reply came from my left. I turned again. It moved, not staying, not belonging to a point or a tree or a person. It felt like when you hold a magnet under a table and move a nail on top, your hand on one side, the nail pretending to have its own mind on the other. I tried to trap it with a trick my brother and I used to do when we wanted to make echoes laugh at themselves. 5 notes, then 2, then a gulp of silence and a single high chirp. I hadn't done that since a culvert under County 9 dared us to be 9 again. The air found it like it had practiced. 5, then 2, then the pause, then the little high end that I never hit clean, and as a boy only got right when I didn't care if I did. The reply didn't just get it, it got the mistakes. It kept the thinness I hate in my high notes. It kept the way I draw the second count too long when I'm cold. Who learns a man's errors if not the man? I stood up because sitting felt like being pinned. The grass hissed around my ankles like a dry mouth too close to my skin. In should have taken everything I did and thrown it to Tennessee, but the answer stayed on me like static. Down by the tent, somebody said, "Is that you?" And someone else laughed, the mean little laugh people use when they feel left out. The dog that had watched me earlier started a low growl that sounded like a throat clearing. It wasn't fear, it was a warning about manners. He didn't look toward trees or toward sky. He looked at the center of the bald where the trail lifts itself as if to look over a fence. I gave it my father's whistle again, part challenge, part petition. I hadn't put that curl on the end in years. The cold tightened my mouth, and without trying, I did the exact turn at the bottom my father used. A little slur you can't teach a son the way you teach him to back up a trailer. He has to find it or not find it. The reply had it, and this time it wasn't a half beat late. It came over top of me this once, just a hair early, and it made the bones around my ears ring like a glass someone had run a finger around. I looked up at a blank sky full of stars, and for the smallest slice of a second, a cold, crisp thing that wasn't my breath crossed my lips. Not wind. Wind, chaps. This was a clean pressure you get when a whistle is right at your mouth that isn't yours. I stopped. I thought if I quit, the world would breathe and so would I. It didn't. The reply filled the absence, not with a repeat of what I'd done, but with what I was about to. I'd been about to finish the phrase with a little fall-off, the way you lay a song down gentle on a porch rail when you're done. The air did it for me. It was kind. That's worse than if it had mocked. The dog's growl hiccuped and changed to that loud, pre-bark breath dogs take when they decide to make trouble on purpose. The couple in the red tent whispered too fast and then went silent like they owed the night money. The bale ledger suggests had felt crowded by a thing that wasn't a body. There are sensible arguments for what I heard. The bald is a saucer, sound walks around it and finds you from your own backside. Temperature inversions make funny mirrors. A man can make a tune in his head so loud that when the night tries to fill your quiet, it does an imitation of what you're already humming. If you want science, there's science in it. If you want faith, that's there too. My father's whistle is a fact in my blood. Maybe blood carries sound the way it carries sugar and sorrow. Maybe I picked up his note and the hill amplified it because it misses men who call someone home. I put rules on myself after Max Patch that no one asked for. I don't whistle after dark in places where the sky doesn't have a ceiling. I don't use the curl at the end in the day either, because that feels like saying a name into a well. When I hear coyotes tune up in my head, I don't push them out with my own mouth. I let them say what they say and keep walking. If I have to call a child, I put my palm to my ribs and yell and let the world hear how ordinary I am. Still, once in a while a tune will use me to check if it still exists, and I'll feel the exact shape of a note against my teeth from a breath that isn't in my lungs. It keeps polite. It keeps that half beat unless I'm about to do something foolish, and then it gets there first and lets me blame the air. When wind slides along the trailer and finds the vent, it plays. When it gets cold, the furnace starts and I shut it down because it sounds too much like Bratis, and I'd rather put on a sweater than add another voice to a house I already know too well. On clear nights, I drive to the kind of hill you can park under and look at the farther dark without standing inside it. I keep the window cracked like a man lets a song out of a jar. Nothing fancy happens. Sometimes a whip-poor-will makes its old two-syllable, and I feel that polite late answer in the space between my teeth where a whistle would live. I don't give it what it wants. I don't know if I'm starving it or being decent. The tune doesn't seem to mind. It just waits. It has the time. And on mornings when my coffee is hot enough to fog the glass and the glass clears just as I think my father's name, the hush that follows has a shape in it I recognize and pretend I don't. I tried human talking, which is always funny at altitude. Hey, that echoed properly, rolled off to trees and came back wrong. No answer. I whistled once, small, like a man in a kitchen deciding whether to call someone to table. From the orange tent came a second whistle, the same shape as mine, and I thought, okay, here's the joke. Someone's playing along. Then the zipper on that tent rattled up and a headlamp scribbled the sky and a man's voice came out shaky and mad. It's in here. Is it you? Right outside. Is it you? He swatted the air like a fly had warmed itself on his lip. I raised my hands because that's what you do when someone can't find where a thing is coming from and thinks it might be you. I wanted to say no, so many ways I used up all my syllables and had to settle for the small one. No, I said, and wished I had one of my father's big ones instead. The rest of that night sorted itself into hours by how still I could make my face. The whistling didn't keep up a concert. That would have been almost boring. It came in tastes. A run of notes when I walked too close to the middle of the bald. A single answering chirp when I tested the air by putting my fingers to my mouth and not blowing. The couple in the red tent moved their camp 5 feet and then 10, as if a spruce bough could be brought closer by will. The dog put his chin on his paws and kept his eyes open in the way of someone who has decided to forgive you and not trust you yet. The sky turned its slow card trick from black to slate to milk. People who had sworn they were sunrise people discovered how long a pre-dawn can be when you don't sleep and don't say so. At first light, the orange tent man came over around the kind of apology that doesn't know where to put itself. He laughed too loud and said we had some jokers out here last night, and then looked over my shoulder in a way I recognize from funerals. And his wife, girlfriend, looked like a person who had made deals with herself in the dark and felt foolish with light on her face. The dog forgave us all anyway. I told myself I'd been up in the wind too long. You can get star-drunk and frostbit around the edges of your senses and hear a normal world talk to itself in a language you think is yours. Down off the bald, the trails in trees again, and noises sit where you put them. A woodpecker's machine gun on a snare drum snag. A squirrel doing child impressions in leaves. A tailgate shut 2 counties away. My head held the aftersound like a tooth holds cold for an hour after ice water. Every polite whistle in birdsong sounded personal. The kettle at home made its no-nonsense scream, and in the second after I took it off, while the steel went from song to quiet, there was a small one-syllable answer from the corner of the room where sound hangs longest. I don't keep a mirror uncovered in a room like that. I don't keep a window all the way shut anymore either. Air wants to be let in on secrets, its manners or its insurance, I don't know which. The orange tent man found me 3 weeks later through a friend of a friend because hollers shrink a world even if you never meant them to. He asked if I'd been the one on the bald whistling after midnight. I said yes, but not the way he meant. He said I had that song in my tent, and he said song like it hurt his teeth. He had heard it inches from his mouth and couldn't say why. He had tried recording it, and the phone had given him the sound of a zipper and his own breath and a little metallic wheeze like a cheap harmonica that had been left in the rain. He didn't sleep 2 nights and then slept like a man who had paid a bill. He hasn't whistled since, he said, which is a word too big for a habit that small. I told him I hadn't either, which was true until I put my fingers to my mouth in my truck last Thursday and realized my inhale had made the shape of the start of it without me. I went out looking for a kind of harmless wonder because I'd been full up on the other kind. Foxfire is a thing everybody in these parts swears they've seen, and nobody can explain without saying a word that sounds like a lie. Witch, haint, angel, science. My granddad called it stump milk. A science teacher I helped paint his porch once said luciferin and luciferase like a prayer, the same way Mama says traveling mercies. Either way, you don't get it by insisting. You go quiet. You let your eyes earn the dark. Behind the north slope, where the cove holds on to moisture like a grudge, a blowdown from years back left beech and poplar laid up like ribs. If you want foxfire, you want rot that's had time to think. Heartwood going to honey sponge, bark lifting in mermaid scales, galleries of beetles clean as handwriting. I parked at the gate, stepped over, and walked in with a red light on my headlamp and a field recorder in my pocket. Pawn shop Tascam, the kind with a fat rec button you can find with your thumb. I told myself I wanted the katydids on tape so I could sleep to them later like a child with a jar of rain. And that's not untrue. Mostly I wanted a night where light did small honest tricks I could take home. The cove smelled like old apples and pennies and earth with a wet memory. Leaves held dew in their veins. A barred owl ran its question twice and then made its own answer. Who cooks for you? You do. I set the recorder on a log at knee height, pressed record, and backed off. The little screen glowed pale, then went dark. My headlamp went next, from red to nothing. The first minute feels like being blindfolded by someone who loves you. Panic if you sniff it, patience if you don't. Then the dark stops being a wall and turns into a room. Foxfire earns its name the way a fox does. Sly from a distance, obvious when you're kneeling in the right patch of leaves. A faint eerie. Eam along a ripped beach blinked a soft green. The pores where worms had been glowed like a child's idea of stars. I'd seen that much before, glimmers that make you want to put your hand out to see if your skin will get remembering on it. What I hadn't seen was range. The whole run of the log, 10 feet of it, lit like the slightest weather front. A brightness you could tell yourself was moonlight until you put your palm in it, and the glow licked your lines and stayed when you moved. After 10 minutes, my eyes had put their anger away and started liking the place. I could make a little work table out of the glow, my notebook, a stump for a seat. I tried my pen on the paper as a joke and realized I could see my own handwriting without cheating. Somewhere down in the leaves, the creek made a zipper of itself. The recorder's red dot pulsed every few seconds, and I felt a stupid fondness for it, like a little animal I was responsible for. I don't pretend to know why that night was brighter. Some years the rain sets the plank. Some years rot minds its manners. The temperature sat high enough to make a man thoughtful, low enough to make breath visible if you tried. A storm had rolled through 2 counties over and left the air pressed down like a hand. I sat there with my palms open and told myself I was being decent to the woods. No picking, no prying, only looking. I wanted a nice story I could tell somebody who didn't believe in anything mean. The glow climbed the split in the log like a vein remembering a pulse, I told myself it was just light being light. Light doesn't usually keep time. It spills, it lays, it shines, or it doesn't. This did. It came in a slow heave, tide small, up the split and across the fine lace of white mycelium, the way a breath fills the chest in a sleeping child. I told myself, eyes. Your eyes pulse. Your own heartbeat can make a world strobe if you stare too hard. I used the trick, looked just off it, and the pulsing stayed. It wasn't my eyes. It was the log. I put the recorder's ear to the glow without touching it. The little meter bars started climbing and falling in a way I didn't expect in a quiet place. No frogs, no trucks, not even wind enough for leaf talk, just the tiny regular lift of the level, as if the device had decided we were having an argument. I cupped my hand around the mics and listened on the headphones. The cove came up close and intimate. In the hiss that is the shape of any night, something made a syllable with no letter in it. Ha. Then a thinner H. Then the space between them that gives two H's meaning. You can make a language out of that if you stare at it long enough. I tried not to. The glow had neighbors, another seam, then a button of light at a knot, then a smear along a scratch where a rock had been mean to the wood years ago. They didn't blink together. They took turns, the way choir rows do when they know the hymn and nobody wants to drown the other. I could have written by it. I did, a little. Time, weather, rotten beach, bright as... The word wouldn't come because there isn't a name for the exact color of green that forgives and accuses at once. The light swelled when I lifted the pen and held when I put the nib down. A meter of it brightened like a thought that hurt. I hummed under my breath to give my hands something to do besides shake, and the light answered, not to the note, to the rhythm. Not the stutter of katydids, not a cicada's idiot counting, a pulse that kept me honest. The recorder's AGC, automatic gain control, was doing its job, rising when I went quiet, dipping when I sniffed. Still, the meters moved even when I held perfectly still, a careful animal in a blind. The pulses on the display made a kind of sentence. 5, 2, pause, 3, 3, drag, hold. My brain put bones on it whether it was a body or not. Names start themselves when you're alone. Chestnut, said the log, or I did. Sycamore, though there was no sycamore in that cove. Pheasant back, though I haven't seen one in years here. Passenger. I didn't think that, not out loud, until later. The glow thickened where grub galleries intersected, little highways lit. I pressed the mic flat to the wood through my glove and something whispered I was going to call beetles if it was anything at all. A fingernail-soft rasp traveled the seam and stopped under my hand like it was deciding whether to test my palm. I moved the mic to my knee and the rasp moved with it, 2 seconds behind, courteous as a waiter. The meter flinched and fell. The glow in that place eased and came again stronger 2 inches away. I could have talked myself out of it with a friend there. Alone, the light turned into company and the company turned into a choir that didn't need me. My breath started being a thing I matched to the pulses and then resented. The trickle of the creek put little bright stitches in the light like a seamstress checking her work. Down the cove, maybe 20 yards, another log woke its own song, faint wave on wave, answering this one on my left with its patient cousin's rhythm. I understood in a way that was half joy, half warning, why fireflies will, on a good summer, find each other's count and turn a whole tree into one blinking fact. My recorder put it into my ears, a pulse that was not mine learning my pauses. The walkout felt like leaving church before the last amen. Wrong, but necessary. I kept my red light off and let the world make do with me. The glow didn't chase. It didn't dim in a manner to tell me I'd hurt its feelings. It kept to its counts, dim, bright, dim, the way a sleeping thing keeps to its breath even after you've stepped out of reach. At the truck, my hands smelled like iron and damp paper. The recorder's little red light stayed honest all the way home, a fine pulse in the cup holder like a wagon's tail lamp. I told myself I had a pretty night in my pocket and maybe a story that wouldn't scare anybody. On the table, headphones on, the night got loud in a way silence can get when you look at it wrong. In the digital hiss and the moving floor noise and my own jacket's one wrong rub, the pattern came back stubborn. My software draws the sound as a picture, colors for volume, time along the bottom like a creek. The pulses made a fence, not even. 5, 2, pause, 3, 3, drag. I laid my breath over it in the chair without meaning to and didn't like how the fence learned my gait. When I stopped breathing on purpose like a fool, the pattern waited out my bad idea and picked me back up on the other side. There are sensible ways to skin it. AGC hunts in the dark. The recorder tries to make a night interesting and mistakes its own noise for content. Bioluminescent fungi don't sing. They shine thanks to luciferase working on luciferin in the presence of oxygen at the rate warm damp wood allows. Heat makes it more. Cold makes it less. Maybe I stumbled on a pocket where the fruiting bodies pulsed because seepage of air through the log happened in a wave I didn't understand. Maybe beetles gnawed at a slow metronome that set me off. The way a small drip in the sink can grow syllables if you want them bad enough. My mouth can make ho and low, and hold out of any nalpo. Nonsense because I'm a mammal. That said, the tapes hum. They're not tapes, they're little cards and files on a hard drive, but they hum when the house goes quiet, and hum is the word I have for a noise you feel first and then hear. It's not in my ears. If I set the recorder off on the table, I can feel the smallest tremble against wood at 2 a.m. the way you can feel a watch you forgot to wind, remembering what it used to be for. The file itself, when everything else is silent, throws a little flicker into the speakers at the places where the glow swelled, like it brought its own electric in its pockets. If I take my headphones off, the pattern walks along the duct thin as a string. If I put the card in a drawer with the old photographs and the pocket knife my father kept dull on purpose, the drawer makes a slight buzz when a storm drops pressure on the ridge and the house draws its breath. I tried killing it with attention. I layered a fan on in the bedroom, the kind of white noise that cures everything ordinary. It softened the hum the way a quilt softens a body's shape and didn't change what was under it. I wrapped the recorder in a towel and then in a trash bag like a mirror in a house with bad luck. I took the files to a friend with good speakers and a better brain. He said, "Forest floor rumble, frog you can't hear, heartbeat if you listen." He made spectrograms that looked like handwriting from a kind man who presses too hard with his pen and said the words pareidolia and apophenia and smiled the way someone smiles when your grief sounds like a word he once liked in a book. I don't go back to that cove alone, not because I think the light would take me, but because I think it might remember me, and I don't want to be owed. On damp nights, the chargers in my house put out the faintest foxfire of their own. Green eyes on the desk, a creep of glow under a cabinet lip. And I catch myself turning things face down the way I did at the Walker place. I keep the recorder wrapped in black cloth with my good brushes. I do not listen to the file after midnight. I do not hum in rooms without a window open. The names I thought I heard through the wood, Chestnut, Passenger, 100 Gone Things, sit heavy in the morning like stones under my tongue. When the house goes to its own quiet and the hum finds its places, the ducked elbow, the edge of the table by the scar, the tiny ring it makes around a glass. I can feel the count line up to my breath if I let it. Some nights I hold mine and the house keeps time for us both, and nothing bad happens. Some nights I breathe on the offbeat until we forget each other, and that's the only way I sleep. Cold makes truth out of metal. In July, the rail will lie to you, expand into laziness, squeak at the joint bars like a gossip. In January, with the light flat and the wind a knife you get used to, steel tells you exactly what it is. I walk deadlines in those months, not for exercise, but for company I can keep a hand on. The spur over Drybone Creek never had much to brag. 2 miles off the main, a hump of ballast. A small timber bridge replaced by a corrugated culvert sometime in the 80s, all of it eaten back by sumac and time. The rails jointed, not continuous. The old 39-foot sticks with angle bars every so often holding hands they never quite trust. They ring if you know where to put your palm. I learned that from my grandfather. He wore a section man's stoop even at the table, like he was still eyeing gauge. He kept a 5-pound maul behind the door and called it the Persuader without smiling. He had names for every part of the track that a book would translate different. Fish plates for angle bars, because they look like a fish if you squint toe and heel where a tie plate grabs a spike, belly for the web of the rail. He'd lay his cheek to the steel and you could see the world settle in him. Steel carries sound like no other. He said on a still night a bolt turning a county away will whisper your name if it wants to. He told me not to put pennies on the rail. He told me never to stand with a foot on each side, because that's how a fool gets taught about patience. He never finished the story about Drybone. He'd start it with his thumbnail worrying a knot in the table and end it with his hand shaking like a paper leaf and somebody asking for coffee to change the subject. The spur is overgrown, but it keeps its geometry the way old men keep their hats, without reason, with stubborn. Tie ends rot down in the ballast, but the line still looks straight as a string in places until a curve shoulders itself and you realize it's been looking at you for a mile. I like the sound of ballast under boots, crunch like an honest argument. Creosote sits low in the nose. The poles are long gone, but glass insulators still show up if you know where to look. Robin's egg blue in the weeds, a dainty crown for an empty king. I pick them up, roll the lips under my thumb, set them back. I don't take things from places that ask me not to. It was the kind of afternoon that can't pick a season, the air saying March but the light saying November. The creek down in the cut moved like a tired thing, making itself do what's right. I wore the gloves I keep in the truck for jobs that need a little courage to start. I walked the line from the old switch stand, rusted flat, target stuck pointing nowhere, toward the culvert, tapping the web with a knuckle the way a man taps a watermelon. Dead rail thuds, live rail sings. This sang in a way I don't have a name for. Thin, not bright, a wobble rather than a ring, like somebody blew on a bottle mouth with a sore throat. I set my palm against the web, 2 fingers on the cool, 2 on the colder air, and felt the small, insistent buzz of a thing that wants you to listen with your whole arm. It came and went. Not traffic on the main. The main is far enough you'd have to lie and say you felt it, and I don't lie to myself if I can keep from it. The sound stepped like a drunk, trying to walk straight. Long, short, long, a pause, then a clump of quicks. I felt foolish. Then I felt guilty for feeling foolish with my grandfather looking out of memory in that way he had when he wanted me to grow up faster than I was going to. I told myself wind. I told myself thermal stress. Sun behind a cloud, metal remembering to be smaller. The rail took another wobbling breath under my hand as if it had heard me and decided to try again. The closer I got to the culvert, the cleaner the tone got. The joints back behind me ticked in a way I could count. Old angle bars speaking to one another down the line like neighbors on porches. I tried to be decent, to keep my boots on the ties and not scuff ballast into the ditch, to speak under my breath when I needed to speak at all. My grandfather's story walked right beside me whether I invited it or not. A winter night, a lamp held low, torpedoes in a canvas bag, the crack and pop they should make when a wheel kisses them, the quiet they made instead. He never said the rest. He left the rest for a boy too young to bear it and a man old enough to pretend he can. The first time I let it be code, I didn't want to. I want that on the record. I know enough dots and dashes to embarrass myself because I used to sleep with a radio cheaping county traffic like a pet, and because I once thought I'd join the old men with CW keys and shaky hands, working a storm by sound alone. I can copy K and R in my own name if you give me all day. S tells on itself with its 3 quicks. O is an easy vanity for people who want to make a night bigger than it is. I swore I would not let my head put letters where a rail put physics. Then the tone steadied into a long that slowed my heart, and 3 tidy shorts that stepped my breath to meet it, and a stubborn dash again after a pause, as if the rail wanted the word to stick. I knelt with the habit of a man who's been taught to get small around something he doesn't understand. Ear to the web through glove, cold like a clean ache in a tooth. The sound didn't just pass by, it moved through. A long that rang in my cheekbone, 2 small taps, a space. I took my hand off the rail. The tone kept and the air above the tie said nothing. It was the metal speaking to itself from somewhere I couldn't see. I counted without writing, which is why I don't trust what I'm about to tell you. I got S, 3 shorts. I got L if I give myself charity. A dot, a dash, and 2 dots that moved their feet around and still asked me to call them 4. I didn't get O because I wouldn't let myself hear it. It's too easy. The code everybody knows how to make into a story. I got W if I let my thumb stand for a pen. Dot dash dash. Slow. That's a word a rail would know, if a rail knows anything. If you want a simpler story, you can have one. Wind will work a corrugated culvert like a flute. The holes in old angle bars make organ pipes for weather. Shrinking rail will groan and pop when the sun drops behind a hill. Everything that moves wants to talk about it. That's the version I carried as I walked. The creek slipped through the big round pipe under the fill, left a dark ruff of moss at the mouth. The ballast over the culvert bears weight different, hard the first inch, then hollow, then hard again. The bolts on the joint above it wore a fine polish of bright on their heads, like fingers had touched them yesterday. A single washer lay where it shouldn't, bold as a good ring on a bad hand. I tried to pick it up. It stuck, then came free with a little hiss as if something had disagreed. The tone ran strong through the rail above the culvert. I put my whole palm flat and felt it rise into me the way a man's voice will ride the chest more than the ear. Long, pause, short, short, short. A longer pause, as if waiting to see if I would answer. There's an answer for that, in a language older than me. I had nothing but a rock. I tapped the web with it, small and shy. 1 little dot, because starting big is bragging. The rail gave me 2 back. Not angry, not eager, courteous. I tapped 3 slow and felt ridiculous tapping an old thing like I was teaching a trick. It gave me 3 slow back and then a drag, a low slide of sound down the length like a hand along a banister, no code in it at all, only the fact of metal. I took a knee in the brush at the culvert mouth, and the cold air that rides water like a saddle went straight up my sleeves. Inside the pipe, the drips that make a winter music had arranged themselves into a tidy pattern without my help. 2 quick ticks, a pause, a long one, like the world had gotten lazy and was still trying to old habit itself into count. I told myself, streams stutter. They find their cut. They make little habits. You can trick yourself into hearing anything if you sit in the dark like a stone with a history. I thought my grandfather's hands would be steady for once if only he were here to show me how to call it stupid and go home. The tone under my palm drew out and then said, in the language of long and short and the space between, something that could be H. I heard the 4 dots if I wanted to, and O, I told myself off for even thinking it, and L, the wobble, the 2 after the dash, and D, dash dot dot. Hold. I took my hand off because it felt like a reprimand or a mercy, and I wasn't going to decide which in the gravel like a child. You can hang an entire winter on the word hold. Men do it. Bridges do it. A cracked plate does when the bolt above it won't take another quarter turn. I walked home along the line with my hands in my pockets and a jaw that hurt in that funeral way. Every joint that ticked out a little warmth at me, I called thermal stress and kept moving. The spur curved away from the creek and the sound went with it, a good neighbor seeing you to your door. In the truck, the heater fan took on a little stutter at the low setting I never used. A dot dot dash if you want to make trouble for yourself. I turned it up high and drowned the alphabet, and then I turned it off and listened to my own teeth announce cold to each other in a language they learned before I got here. There are decent reasons for all of it. Aeolian tones, walk pipes, and rails like notes on a stave. A corrugated culvert will sing when air runs it, and temperature drops read like metronomes in the right clamped joint. The steel plate under a rail can talk to the spike and the tie and still call it silence. If you've got Morse in your head because your grandfather kept a telegraph sounder on a shelf for no reason except it wouldn't let him throw it away, you're going to find a dot where other people hear a drip. If you've been counting breath against Knox and Brattis and box fans and porch paint that won't dry for a year, your body is going to match rhythm before your mind can say, don't. The first night after dry bone, the baseboard in my mother's kitchen cooled in ticks. I could write down if I had the nerve. Tick, 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 long tick. I didn't write. A shopping cart wheel in the IGA had a flat that thumped K, dash dot dash, and I nearly laughed at myself out loud in the bread aisle like a many-named fool. My phone vibrates like a message, and I feel it in my forearm where steel once taught my bones how to listen. I make a pot of beans and the lid chatters, and I think, hold. Everything in the house that belongs to heat and weight has learned a syllable I'd rather not know. On nights the ridge squeezes air down into the valley and the double-wide pops and sighs. The duct over the bedroom plays an angle bar hymn that I don't hum along to because I want to sleep sometime before Sunday. I tried to make it sensible by writing just once. I went back out with a steno pad and a pencil intending to put down the long and short as I heard them to see what story a fool makes if you let him. The cold made my fingers clumsy, and the rail under my palm held a steady tone that made me a liar on paper. The only letters I owned by the time my thumb quit working were the ones I already expected. S in the joints, L because I wanted it, W because I had to finish the word, the O I refused to give the world. The culvert breathed its little flute, and the water stitched the pauses together. And I stood there with my pencil going dull and my grandfather's absence like a bruise and felt a kind of shame for trying to take dictation from a noise. I did take one thing, and I shouldn't have. There was a blue insulator in the weeds, unchipped, perfect in a way glass shouldn't be out there. And it looked the size of a thing you could put in a pocket and let it stop talking. I took it home. I set it on the windowsill where mornings get friendly. 2 nights later, the humming that lives under quiet moved from the duct to the sill, a small, constant bee without wings. The glass breathed cold into my hand when I moved it, and my thumb left a print that stayed frosted longer than it ought to. I took it back before the week was out and set it where I found it, pressed into the ballast as if I were closing a lid. The house's noises went back where they belonged, which is to say, anywhere but under glass. Maybe I imagined that cause and effect. Maybe it's a courtesy I'll keep paying for. What my grandfather never said, my aunt did, because somebody always does if you live long enough. There had been a winter derailment on the spur when he was young, a truck on the fill, a washout under the rock dressed like a road. He and 2 men took flags and the bag of torpedoes to the curve to gay. To steal a vocabulary bigger than hold. Something in the night ate the sound. The first car went across, the second did not. He lost a friend in a way that made his fingers shake the rest of his life, the way they did when he told me about Drybone and then couldn't finish. That's her story. It doesn't change what my hand felt or didn't on a day 60 years later when the sun couldn't pick a job. It would be easy to turn this into a ghost tale where a line learns a man's name and a culvert asks for something you can't afford. It's cleaner to call it physics, and most days I am in the business of cleaner. I still walk rails in cold months because I am bad at learning. I don't step off to piss where the culvert hears. I don't put my palm on the web without meaning. When the line starts that thin wobble under my skin, I make my breath go stubborn and think of anything but words. If a thing needs me, it's got a better vocabulary than my rocks do. If it's only the world reminding itself where it's weak, that's worth hearing without making a sermon out of it. Short off is the kind of ridge that makes you behave. It's not tall so much as sure of itself. Burn scars still black on the snags from the last big fire. Quartz showing in the path like old teeth. The drop into Linville Gorge, a dark grammar lesson you don't want to fail. If you've ever gone up Wolf Pit, you know how the trail climbs like it owes you money. I went up with a tripod over my shoulder and a thermos clanking my hip and a cheap camera that had never given me a reason not to trust it. October had dried the pine needles to matchsticks. The air had that brittle taste it gets when the first frost is past and the second hasn't decided. People say the lights are a trick of distance, that the highway throws itself against the bend of air at just the right angle, that trains do the same, that plasma sits down over quartz when the mountain gets moody and decides to rub itself on the world. I don't argue. I like good explanations most days better than bad mysteries. I told myself I was going to log what I saw, like weather, time, direction, wind, cloud, whether my eyes were tired, whether my coffee ran out too soon. The brown mountain lights, the blue ones folks whisper about on the short-off side, are a thing you can make a hobby out of until the hobby makes a shape in your house you didn't invite. At dusk, chairs sprouted where the rock comes clean. Camp chairs, tailgate chairs, a blanket under somebody with a dog who knew better than to chase falling stars. The smoke from a little cook stove made one straight line before the wind took it and drew it sideways. There was a boy with a scanner, two women with a thermos they kept laughing into, and a man with a lens the size of a baby who kept stamping the ground to make sure he could still feel it. I set my tripod low, checked batteries I'd already checked, and put the wide glass on because I didn't know if the night would be generous or stingy. In my pocket, a little notebook my father had carried about fishing knots. He left it in a tackle box that became my toolbox when I stopped trusting my hands with hooks. The pencil marks in it go forward and then stop. I keep it for the pressure of his grip on paper, which is a form of weather too. I don't talk much about his last day because I don't have the voice for it. Monitors glow a dumb blue that does not belong to anything alive. Pulse oximeter numbers flare and fade like they're trying to teach you a song you hate. That day had a sheen I can still smell if I don't keep my head busy. If I mention it here, it's because Shortoff held the same color in its pocket when the first lights showed. I saw 2, then 3, then 5. They didn't bob like lanterns. They didn't stream like traffic. They unhooked from the ridge across and slid sideways, blue gas bright without throwing light on anything else. I wrote 714, 3 lights west ridge, steady, 722, 5, 1 wobbles. The wobbler felt like a child inventing its own walk. The camera did its honest little sounds. Shudder. Beep. I checked the back and saw what you always see when the night thinks it knows you better. Black with a suggestion of stars, noise that looks like snow, not a scrap of blue in it my eyes swore to. I told myself the human eye is a better liar than a CCD. I told myself to be patient. Somebody down the rim said, "There they go." And I don't know who was in charge of they anymore, but I nodded like we were in church and it was my turn. The lights answered nothing. They moved as if the gorge were a bowl and somebody had tilted it a quarter inch. I got colder than I ought to for the temperature. My fingers kept finding the soft, worn spot on the pencil where my father had held it. I wasn't thinking of him out loud. I didn't say his name. I let the ridge make its noises. Wind combing wire grass, a whir from a moth that hadn't learned the season. The far bottom Linville throwing itself over rock. When a light lifted in the darkness like a thumb off a blue jar, my jaw did that funeral ache I hate. That's how you know when something is going to walk with you after you leave. Your face decides before your feet do. There's a trick your brain will play after 20 minutes. It will lay a light where you were already looking so you can say you were right. That's why I look away on purpose. I stared at the flat dark to the south, then cut my eyes to the right, then left, then to the line where Brown Mountain crouches like a shoulder. The blue held its temper and burned anyway, fish eggs in a black stream. I set the camera to 30 seconds and let the shutter take a little nap. When it woke up, it gave me a square of the night without the part I came for. I took another and started thinking in multiples of 30 like a fool, adding minutes to reasons. The dog sighed like he was bored with us. When it happened, it wasn't out there the way you'd expect. It was right at the edge of my own sight, where a migraine aura lives if you've ever had one. I blinked and the afterimage stayed. I looked hard to make it go away, and it leaned back into the space behind my eyes like a person who knows how to lean in a doorway. Blue. Not neon bar blue. Not police blue. Not sky. Foxfire blue, if Foxfire learned to read. I wanted my camera to be good at anatomy, to catch nerves and habits and make them pixels. I pressed the shutter anyway. Habit, hope, I don't know which, and the little green light on the back went out like it had. D been pinched. Battery at 62% went to 9, then to a tiny icon with a frown. Somebody said my name, not close. Downridge, the women with the thermos were asking the man with the baby lens if he'd seen what I'd seen. If I had. My own name in my ear made the blue sharpen, a lens focusing that I wasn't holding. I moved my eyes and it moved with them like a floater does, but with intention, not physics. I shut my eyes to see if I could outwill it, and it stayed. Blue coin faces stacking lightly, not pressing, as if a thought had decided to occupy a corner rent-free. When I opened up again, the lights across the gorge had gone quiet. The ones inside had not. The little lean-to down the trail, the kind of cabin a drunk wind built. 4 posts, a roof, a floor that keeps you a foot off the cold, took my legs without my vote. I wanted cover, not from rain, from sky. The floorboards held my weight the way a hand does. In the line where they met the joists, nailheads watched. They keep their own small suns. You've seen that. How a nail remembers heat longer than the board. This wasn't that. Each ring shank brightened the way a devil's bit flower does just before it opens. A little collar of blue, a fringe. As if weather was happening under me and the nails were the first to know. It ran in a line. The nails up the center glowed, settled, then the ones to the side took their turn as if the floor were a map and some idiot was tracing a river on it. I put my hand down to say I didn't consent, which is a habit I have with things that glow. The boards were cold and damp and honest. The glow kept to metal. I said my name to myself like a password to a door that wasn't mine. The line of nails that went toward the opening brightened and then dimmed, not like something reacting, but like something not quite managing to keep a promise. I thought father once, and I didn't mean to. It's a word I keep like a tooth. The nail heads along the sill woke in a soft wave, 2 inches at a time, as if the thought traveled slower than sight but faster than language. I do not know what to make of that. It is nothing like a candle playing tricks. It is nothing like a phone LED. It had the logic of weather and the rudeness of a hand on your sleeve in a crowd. In the morning, the card in the camera had dates that belong to a calendar the manufacturer uses when it forgets who it is. 1970, January 1st. Every file had that name, the way a mind calls everything by the wrong word after it's been knocked. The long exposures that should have shown stars showed deep, healthy black with a bad pixel flickering once like a gnat. One frame had a smear I could call a lens flare if I felt generous. It had the right disrespectful color. The notes in my father's book are neat until they aren't. Timings I wrote last night read like I was trying to spell a sigh. There are reasons. Static rides dry cold. Nails set in old pine will pinch dew into their collars, and the world will play its blue trick in the film thin where water thinks about being air. Quartz does what quartz does when weight pushes it, makes a small mean charge that has to go somewhere. The gorge is a throat. Voices echo in throats. People have been dragging chairs up here for 100 years to see what headlights and trains and nerves can do to an evening. You can put it all into a paragraph and sound like a man who finished a book he started. That's the version I told myself over coffee that wouldn't stay hot because my hands were not done shaking. But it's also true that the blue behind my eyes came home polite and didn't ask permission. It's thinner at noon and worse at 2 a.m. the way everything is. If I think father hard, the coin stacks sharpen, and if I push the thought away and think of bread or fence wire or the way the dog takes steps before he jumps, they go a little foggier like a memory losing patience. I don't test it often. It feels rude to test something that hasn't broken anything but my sleep. The screws in my register faceplate catch the light at night in a way I don't let myself look at. The router's little LEDs are gaffer taped. I put tape over the microwave clock. The breaker comes off at the panel when I remember. I am not trying to make ghosts. I am trying to get a night. Mama says don't say your name after dark if something wants it. I keep that like a rule. You don't argue because you like the person who spoke it. If someone calls me across a lot after sundown, I wave instead of answer. I don't whistle anymore. That last hill took it from me anyway. I sleep with a cloth over my eyes. Not because light bothers me, but because eyes do. The cloth is damp some nights because it helps, and I'm not interested in the why of that. When the blue shows itself at the edge of sight while the house is counting in its ducks, I breathe wrong on purpose so we don't match. There are evenings I go out to the porch and lift the window a crack and whisper, "You can go if you need to," and yes, I feel foolish, and no, I don't care. People will ask me, "Did you see them?" The real ones out there. I say yes, I say they were pretty as sins that don't hurt nobody. I do not add that the prettiest ones were inside my skull and prefer to be called without an invitation. A man with the big lens sent me a link to a forum where everybody has an opinion, and some of them wear lab coats on their avatars, and most of them are kind. I read for 10 minutes and learned a new word, triboluminescence, and said it out loud twice because I needed a handle. It didn't change what the nails did when I said Father once more to myself standing in my kitchen in my socks. They brightened in memory, which is the worst kind of bright. My house's nails, thank God, behave like the put-upon servants they are. It's the screws that shine wrong, the ones that hold switches and hinge plates and memories to walls. I paint over the ones that insist. The paint dries. That is a comfort. I don't have an end. I didn't that night, and I don't now. I didn't catch the lights with a camera, and the ones I caught came home. When the weather presses down on the ridge, when thunder elbows its way up the gorge and leaves its smell in the halls of our bodies, the blue will take a step into the room and make itself known, and then sit back like it's polite and waiting for someone better at talking to tell it where to go. I don't tell it. I go to bed early when I can. I keep my name in my mouth like a stone and don't spit it in the dark. On mornings when the kettle sings and I take it off the burner and the kitchen has that tiny moment of wrong silence, sometimes I think of my father's shoulder under my hand on the last day, and the blue obliges with a small memory at the edge of sight. I make my coffee anyway. I open the back door so everything that needs to can leave or enter without crossing me. Maybe that's manners. Maybe that's superstition. It works enough nights that I don't argue with results.